Hello, hello. You're on the road less traveled with GaryL and GGsBoo over here on reallibertymedia.com, complete with a chat room. And if you're not in the chat room, or you're just missing out on about 99% of the content, we probably throw about 1% in there just to try to keep things interesting. And there's a whole bunch of people in that chat room. But GGsBoo is here. Hi, GGsBoo.
Hi, everybody. How is everybody?
Yeah, how's everybody doing? Yeah, it's been a good day so far, except for the fact that one of GGsBoo's landing gear failed to deploy, and she ended up having a little crash. You want to share that story, or what do you want to do?
Well, the thing about it is it wasn't landing gear. It was my sugar got too low, and I fell. And I tore my right kneecap all to pieces. And it hurts. And I hop. But we'll live through it.
Yeah, boo-boo bear. And Akis didn't do a thing to help, did he?
And he didn't do anything this time, no.
Well,
but he did this past week, you know.
No, he didn't really do anything crazy this week, did he?
He went to Walmart.
Oh, I don't know if we want to tell that story. Yeah, that might be giving away a little bit too much information. But
okay, but we'll be quiet then.
Yeah, but needless to say, that he's a very diplomatic sort.
Very much so. Very diplomatic and very cordial. We say he's the meter and the greeter.
He could get a job at Walmart, I guess. Put one of those vests on and meet people at the door.
Very, very much so.
Yeah, he could do that. Well, hey, Grim there. Hey, how you doing? And how's everybody out there in Real Liberty Media Land? We just had 3 to 5. We had Hal and Behind the Woodshed, and it always fascinates me, GGsBoo, that so many times his stories from his storyboard and the stories from our storyboard kind of overlap one another. I sit here and say, whoops, we could do that. Oh, yeah, we're doing well, with the exception of GGsBoo got a bad wheel, but we'll fix that up. That's right, GGsBoo?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We're here. Keep it going and keep it fixed up.
Yeah. Yeah, what's the weather like here? Well, we had that cold front go through, and now we have temperatures dropping, had some wind blowing, it's been cloudy and a little bit rainy, and typical weather for this type of the year, I suppose. Whoop, are you still there, GGsBoo?
I dropped out of the chat room, I don't know why.
I don't know either. You might have to rejoin. That's what caught my eye. I saw you drop. I thought usually that happens when your internet goes. So anyway, that's all the folks out here in the chat room. It's a big thanks shout out to JJS999JJS in the chat room. And he plays some outstanding music pre-show. I kind of used it as a green room, if you will, to get ready for our show. We had some very amazing stuff we were talking about. Now, Jay, he's from the UK, by the way, and GGsBoo is back. From the UK, and not making any fun of anybody, but people have their national accents and dialects and so forth. And I was just saying to JJ in the chat room that when he was talking on his radio show, they had to tune my ear up a little bit to the brogue. And it's really not that hard to do for us, because that is an elemental part, that accent is an elemental part of the Appalachian accent, isn't it, GGsBoo?
Yeah, sure is.
Yeah, so it just takes a second to tune it up, and I was commenting in the chat room that, so when we occasionally go back home, and I take friends along who've never been there, who've never experienced
it's like a different world for them, isn't it?
Yeah, and when we start talking amongst ourselves, as you would say, and suddenly they discover that they can no longer understand what you're saying.
No, they They don't have a clue. Somebody said something the other day, and I had a saying. I said, "By God, that dog don't hunt." Well, they fell out. They said, "What does that mean?" I said, "Just ain't working."
That dog ain't gonna hunt.
And then we said something, and I was fed up with something that one of my girlfriends said, and I said, "By God, I've stirred my last batch of gravy in that mess."
Yep.
She said, what are you talking about? I said, "You know how you stir gravy? And it's hard work to get it real good and smooth." I said, "That's the way it is. You got to work at it." And I said, "I don't work in that kind of mess no more."
And what was it your granddaddy used to say about cornbread?
Oh, he was mad one day, and my granddaddy was just a wonderful person. I miss him so very much. He was mad, and I said something. I said, "Oh, Granddaddy, don't talk like that." And I said, "How? Just think about this minute. How old are you?" And he turned around and looked at me and he said, "Bernann, I'm old enough to eat cornbread, damn it, and not get choked." And I said, "Okay." Got you, Granddaddy. We hear you.
That's right.
Old enough to eat cornbread and not get choked.
Roughly akin to "it ain't my first rodeo" kind of thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, say hello to everybody over in the chat room. Grimnir, Cowboy Tech, Moose Girl, Asmo, Betsy, Bitcoin Bob, Circle, Chloe, Graham Z is in the chat. I haven't seen her say anything. IB Don C, Java Doctor, JJ, thanks again for the music earlier. You guys need to tune in when JJ is on. You'll enjoy the music selection. It's quite good. Wanda Taco, Maestro Rail, Paul Bunyan, Kate, Rain, Rob Works, Tip Bob, Trust No One. There's Behind the Woodshed, which is Hal, and his show 3 to 5. And if you missed that, you just missed everything. Dakota, Demoff, Lash Nasty, Frumpy, GGsBoo, Jehovah, Kozu, Moi, Nelson Dubois, Poxified, Ponsaw, Sock Puppet, Slim Jim, Flim, and the Phantom. Okay, everybody's here. We have a quorum, GGsBoo. So.
Yes, we do. So
what's our first order of business?
I don't know, you the boss.
I ain't no boss. That's a rare thing to
hear a woman say, isn't it?
That's not.
You're the boss, baby.
That's just kidding. But anyway, I think what the whole thing is, and we talk about this quite a lot, is this whole concept of, are those out there, are they trying to kill us off? Is there a concerted effort across the board to reduce the population? Let's put it in those terms. I have come to believe that there's a big yes to that question. And there's some historic precedents in that. And we start talking about eugenics, and we start talking about population control, of course. And we hear all about that. And I think GGsBoo has, and well, we both do, have some particular sensitivities to that kind of thing. I think there's some history there for that, isn't there, GGsBoo?
Oh, sure. We're talking about the Native Americans. They wiped them out. They wiped a lot of the Irish people out.
Yeah.
I think the reason that our mountain roots, our Appalachian roots, made it is they were just stronger stock because the Indians had not been exposed to any of the terrible diseases that was brought over. And they were infected, purposely a lot, but the Irish were starved out of Ireland and sent over here. And I think they did fairly well, but there were so many of them that died. And we've got all kind of ethnic backgrounds in both of our bloodlines, but the one that calls to me mostly is the Cherokee. But I was very surprised about, and I know I'm getting off a little bit, but this is kind of goes along with it. They say you can't get away from your roots. You really can't. I have some German ancestry in me too, and German things appeal to me. Gary's picked up on that a lot. Even though I'm a real girly girl, so to speak, I've got that great element of a tomboy too. I can shoot a gun, ride a horse, track in the woods, camp. But the girly part of me likes all the German things like the crystal and the china and the silver. And I have a lot of that that I inherited from my German ancestors. And we have it displayed in our home. And it's really beautiful. And everybody that comes in says, "Oh, why you got this out? Aren't you afraid it's going to get broke?" Well, why do I want to pack it up in a box and leave it packed up? So we're out enjoying it. And I got off a little bit there, Gary, but I think what it does, I guess what I'm trying to say is whatever blood that you have that flows through your veins is there. And there's such things as genetic memory. I don't care what anybody says. It's there. Genetic memory is. Go ahead. I took up too much time.
No, you're good. Yeah, Carl Jung would totally agree with that. And I have to submit that I believe there's something to that as well. And, there's a lot of things going on that we don't have a firm grip on as to the true reasons behind things. Mm-hmm. And it's just like we look at all this history. I mean, people just outdoing, just killing off people amazingly. And there is such a history as that. And if you are one who believes that is no longer possible, I think you probably need to broaden your horizons a little bit. At least consider the possibility that you are, as a group, being regulated. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So much of this information on this storyboard tonight relates to this sort of thing, and it always does. And as I think back about it, the topics that we tend to cover somewhat address this whole issue of population control and population, individual control, and Hal mentioned it when talking about smart meters and all this stuff that goes on. If you distill it down to its core, you see that there's a control element involved in all of it. You start talking about the Internet of Things and all this sort of thing. It's all designed as a control element. And some of the stories we'll touch on tonight, and we'll blow through some of them. And some of them are double also as PSAs, public service announcements. But for example, now you would think Whole Foods. Now Whole Foods has come under a lot of heat. It's not my favorite place. They belong to Amazon now, another Jeff Bezos property. But the Diestel, I'm going to say it in the German way, Diestel, Diestel turkey brand, which is sold at Whole Foods, tested positive for an FDA prohibited drug, and that would be growth hormone, and which is strictly prohibited. Chloramphenicol is one of the drugs, and because it has severe toxic effects in humans, including bone marrow suppression or aplastic anemia in susceptible individuals. So, according to a complaint November 13th of this year against Diestel Turkey Ranch, they inspected the turkeys on 4 dates and reported, in addition to that drug, residues of antibiotics, veterinary antibiotics, a hormone, or other pharmaceuticals were also found. So you think organic stuff and blah, 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 you will get all this good stuff. Don't get rope-a-doped into that. Because I think what we found, and a lot of us talk about, is the fact that that organic thing could just be a big diversion. Just like something else that recently came up that we may get to later that turned out to be something of a diversion that we didn't think about. So be careful about what you eat. I mean, how there's so many avenues of approach, and you talk about that in a warfare environment. Avenues of approach to attack and destroy an enemy. So if you come to the conclusion that you are considered an enemy by certain others, then you can start to realize that there are a variety of approaches that apparently seem to be, evidence would suggest, these approaches are being taken to attack you. Quite. GGsBoo, any thoughts so far?
Well, I kind of think that when you were talking about organic and taking anything, I think the only way that you can be sure that you're getting organic is do it yourself. And you got to really be sure that you're getting heritage seeds, none of the GMOs. Friend of mine thought that they were getting heritage seeds. And they started some tomato plants. They made mutable tomatoes. I even ate one, and it was good. So they saved the seeds of some of the tomatoes. And when they grew, guess what happens to GMOs when you try to grow them from something it would grow? And they found out that the person that sold them these seeds lied, and they were very upset. So get your stuff from a reputable seed bank and do your own growing, and make sure you know what's gone into the dirt before you do it. That's the only way you can be for sure. Only way.
Yeah, only way to do it. Dope a rope. Did I say that? I don't know that I did. Anyway, thanks, Al. And other, another thing to consider here is you also notice how the system is designed to enrich itself, even though, how do we put this? And you might be getting undone, but they'll let no crisis go, unaddressed. And certainly, if there's profit to be made off your undoing, that let's think a minute about these private jails.
Oh God, that makes me sick.
Yeah, I mean, you can do badly, and they send and I read something just recently that talked about the illogic nature of taking someone who's stealing and then putting them in a situation where the government will again steal from you in order to keep them up.
That and these very rich people who commit these, what I call these big white collar crimes, able to pay to go into these so-called luxury jails. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Nah. Throw them in there with them good old boys. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, that's right. And
let me tell you this. We had a state trooper in this area who had a thing for real young girls, and he got caught up because he videoed himself on the hood of his car with a young girl, underage girl, with his dash cam, if you can believe that. And, of course, they got him really quick. But his parents were able to see if they could put him in one of these pay-as-you-go jails. I'll pay his salary. Guess what? The judge wouldn't let him. Said, nope, we're going to turn the key on you like you turned on so many other people. You saw that the key was turned. First 24 hours he was there, he was beat almost to a pulp. Simply because they don't like people who mess with children. Now, if he'd have went to the paid jail, he'd have been living in a lap of luxury. But he got some big time, and he's got to follow that big time in that rough and rowdy Southern jail with them good old boys. Go ahead. I'm done.
No, you're okay. And JJ points out in the chat room that in the UK, their prime minister her husband owns like 45% of the shares in the company that she allocated to run the prisons. So you have this prison industrial complex. That's true in most of the developed world. Private prisons, and of course private prisons have investors, and who might hold some of that in their portfolios. Well, what about your judges and your lawyers and your city leaders, or your corporate leaders, or your governmental leaders? And so is there not a conflict of interest then, in as far as what they like to call the judicial system? When it becomes financially advantageous to have as many people in prison as possible, then is it likely that you're going to get a fair shake? I mean, come on now. He asked if he could call in. If we do, we have a Skype going on here, but you'd have to know it's Pegasus 6, all in alpha characters. Pegasus 6, and then the number's 870. If you can find that on Skype, you can hit me up with a Skype request, and we can hook you up there, JJ. But anyway, we can add you to the conversation. Yeah, Dick Cheney also why I mean, so much of this, it just seems to me, flies in the face of common sense. But there again, people just go about their merry ways and say, well, it could be that really doesn't mean anything. Well, yeah, right. Come on now. Wow. Anyway, that kind of got off on a tangent. But along these same lines, it turns out that now suddenly NBC News reports that experts say that we need to revise the blood pressure guidelines. In other words, they lower the blood pressure guidelines to anyone with a pressure higher than 130 over 80 will be considered to have hypertension or high blood pressure.
And
now,
see them everyday
ahead.
people. Everyday people don't realize that that's a normal blood pressure if they're not versed in what you consider normal. It almost pays you to be educated when you go to a doctor. I think it's terrible what they're doing myself.
And what might be a possible reason that this would happen?
What we talked about, genocide.
That's one, but the enrichment side of the equation, right?
Oh, yeah, making money for the pharmaceuticals and everything.
Sure.
But you give somebody a blood pressure 130 over 80 and give them a blood pressure pill, and you drop it to 70 over 30, and it will drop that low. Trust me. You're going to be doing a code, and guess what? Whoever's running it didn't make it. So, you got that.
Yeah. And JJ points out in the UK, they stopped funding mental illness help. So now what happens that mentally ill people go to prisons. So they're filled.
Exactly.
Yeah. So socialist delight, as P. Bunyan says. Yeah, this is the world in which we live. And it's the one, and apparently, and I've listened to a couple people talk about this, there may be a quickening going on, and I think some of what Hal talked about in his show about all this clickbait stuff, exclusive bombshell, all this stuff and all this fake news that's coming from both sides of the aisle. It comes from the alternative news as well, which is a good way to identify who's real and who isn't, who's Memorex in the old school way of saying it, is to watch for that, because there's a whole lot of flack getting fired, which there's a whole lot of distraction, there's a whole lot of noise, and the noise increases. This means that someone is over the target. Now, do we know exactly what the target is yet? Nah, I don't think so exactly. But we're over it as a group. And so the noise level has just gone crazy, and the crazy stories have gone crazy. And they shriek louder on network news and scream and talk over top of one another. And wah, 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 wah. That's all you hear. So you know something is quickening. Something is going down, and we're right at the cusp, I think, of something big time going on. Of course, this whole business about blood pressure, you could easily say, well, everybody lines up for a handout. We got to have it's just like Obamacare was a bailout for the insurance industry. And now there's a big hoorah about all that. And it just goes on and on. So many distractions. So what does this force one to reasonably... Well, what happens to people? We talk about blood pressure. It's a good point, GGsBoo. People start becoming more stressed, don't they? Mm-hmm. And so with all this, they get mad, they get divided. You're liberal, you're progressive, you're a conservative, you're a racist, whatever. That's all crap. They're all artificial labels. And they try to put these people in these little pigeonholes. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever met someone who is conservative about every issue?
Yes.
You sure about that?
Yes. Drives me crazy.
No, I'm talking about everything. Or have you ever met anyone who's liberal about every issue? See, I would submit that you don't, because I think if you sit back and think about it, if you wanted to live to be 100 years old, well, that would be a conservative point of view, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. But that same person who wants to live to be 100 years old would vote for somebody like Hillary Clinton, right? Possibly. Mm-hmm. So the point I'm trying to make is these are all artificial labels, and they're labels designed to create subgroups, and so those subgroups can stand on either side of the fence and throw rocks back and forth. And so the guys who really matter, who we really should be looking at, are sitting back and saying, watch these people do this, and they throw these labels around, and they even adopt these labels for themselves. They apply, as Tal was saying, they make an application to themselves. I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal, I'm a progressive, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, whatever. It doesn't mean anything. You're not getting anywhere. But anyway, as this goes on, your stress level increases, right, GGsBoo?
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, let me give you a real handy-dandy definition of what stress is. That's something to think about. Stress is the difference between the sizes of your area of concern versus the size of your area of influence. If your areas of concern are way out of whack with your areas or your ability to influence them, then you're going to have stress. So there are only two remedies to that problem. One of them is to expand your area of influence to match your area of concerns. How likely is that? Probably not very. The other, obviously, then, is to reduce your areas of concern to match your areas of influence, thus creating balance. So how do you do that? Well, one way to do it is to refocus your efforts to things that you can reasonably have an effect on. And those are probably going to be locally based. You're probably not going to have a big effect on what happens in the world. You're probably not going to have a big effect on what happens in your country, or maybe even in your state. But you might have a reasonable chance at affecting something that occurs to you locally. So doesn't it make sense that we redefine our efforts, or refine rather, our efforts to address more local issues and become more focused on local issues than being distracted by all these big crazy things that give us stress that we have no way of reasonably addressing? What are your thoughts on that, GGsBoo?
Oh, I don't have any.
Okay. Anyway, we're kind of off on a tangent, but I think that's something that's important for all of us to keep in mind. Just not get too wrapped around the axle about stuff that we can impact, that we can affect. Because what's that do? It takes us off the track. It takes us off.
Takes our energy. Takes my energy. If you remember me in particular.
Go ahead. Go expand on that thought a minute.
Okay, when I get worried about things that I don't think that that might be happening in the world, or maybe within a family structure or whatever, Gary has told me plenty of times, all it's doing is taking your energy, and it does, and it gets me upset. And then, I kind of get on a little tangent of my own. And I have learned one thing in this last 2 weeks is not to let the tangents bother me. Has it been easy? No, but it does not take everything out of me like it used to. We had a real big, important thing happen this week. Gary and I did. And I was very surprised at the way that I handled it. And I was very surprised it didn't take so much of my energy. Simply because I finally listened to my husband and didn't give it any. I was able to state it square in the face it, and turn my back and turn around and walk away. So don't let things take your energy and burn your energy up, your own personal energy, or things that you don't think you have control over. You might have more control than you realize. And I kind of got on a tangent, but I wanted to address that too.
No, that's good. It was just right on target. And there are certain circles out here that I won't name specifically, but they have some very basic terminology that is quite important to understand. You are either a receiver or you're a feeder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? There are plenty of people out there who are very good at being feeders, and they will get you or maneuver you and condition you into a place where you now are a 100% receiver. That means you are reacting to what they give to you. And that could be in the form of threats, or that could be in the form of just verbal control. And there's the dogs barking.
That's Al Jean.
Ollie Jean. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to be a receiver. No, you want to be the feeder. You want to be the one feeding your situation. You don't want to be a receiver, just like being a tennis ball being bounced back and forth across the net. No, you want to be your own feeder, where you dictate. You're the one in control of your attitude, which is the only thing you really ultimately have any control over, actually, is your attitude. But your attitude is everything, as you've heard. But anyway, moving along here, and along with this whole theme of are they trying to kill you? Now, remember, we talked about this information that was displayed at the Deagle website that you can go back in the archives and look and check the links if you're not familiar with that. That shows you the projections of the world population, and it's very shocking. The United States population in particular, very shocking. The reduction thereof in the next, I can't remember what it was now, not too many years, 7, 8 years, not long. Big major reduction projected from a lot of sources, and very reliable sources apparently. But anyway, Bloomberg puts out an article back on August 8th that addresses the issue of Americans dying younger. But that saves corporations billions of dollars. Now see where this financial construct comes back into play yet again. It comes into play with your prisons, but now you see it comes into play with your corporations, your livelihood. Where corporations will save billions of dollars because Americans are dying younger. And why is that? Because of the lower pension costs. I'll read a little bit of this. Steady improvements in the American life expectancy have stalled, and more Americans are dying at younger ages. But for companies straining under the burden of their pension obligations, the distressing trend could have a grim upside. If people don't end up living as long as they were projected to, their employers ultimately won't have to pay them as much in pension, and so forth and so on. So let me ask you this. This is just an accident? Do you really, really believe that this is just a coincidence? If you do, I still have a portfolio of bridges that I'm willing to sell. Anything to talk about there, GGsBoo?
Oh, we've covered it pretty good.
Okay. And, of course, now one of our favorite punching bags, Monsanto, in an EcoWatch article of November 2nd, they pulled the launch of a new pesticide after skin rash complaints. The latest pesticide, NemaStrike, was pulled because people were reporting having skin irritation, including rashes that appear to be associated with the handling and application of the product. Let me ask you this, GGsBoo. If it gives you a skin rash, what do you think it happens to your lungs when you breathe it in?
Oh, tears them up.
Now, do you really, really believe that no one knew that that was a possibility?
No, I don't believe it.
Of course not. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency announced approval of the nematicide, also known as tioxazepine or something like that, in May 2017. Monsanto said the EPA conducted extensive evaluations before it issued registration. Reuters reported that Monsanto's CEO, Hugh Grant, expected NemaStrike to launch across up to 8 million U.S. crop acres in fiscal year 2018. But alas, this latest news is another blow for the St. Louis-based agritech giant. Monsanto's other federally approved products, the dicamba-based, which we'll talk about in a minute, XtendiMax herbicide, has been linked to widespread crop damage in the United States due to dicamba's tendency to volatilize, I guess that means spread out, and drift onto neighboring non-target fields. And of course, Monsanto insists that its products are safe and farmers are improperly using it to mean farmers. Thoughts, GGsBoo? Have to take a pause every now and then. This stuff is crazy because then Tyler Durden over at Zero Hedge, he reports on this dicamba business. Monsanto, as a result, is in court again as their new herbicide accidentally kills 3.6 million acres of crops. They thought they developed an amazing scheme to corner the Midwest farming market when they developed new genetically engineered seeds that were resistant to their new herbicide called dicamba. The resistance of Monsanto's new magical seed crops to dicamba meant that the herbicide could be sprayed liberally by farmers to eradicate weeds and boost yields. However, a little problem came up when the spray drifted over to other people's non-GMO fields and killed all their crops. The new version of this herbicide called dicamba is part of more than $1 billion of investment that pairs it with new genetically engineered seeds that are resistant to the spray. So who is exactly investing in all this? I mean, you say Monsanto, but Monsanto is a publicly held company, right?
Oh, you had some big people behind it.
Absolutely. And the same sorts of people who are invested in corporate prisons, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And the same sort of people who are invested in your pharmaceutical industry, right? Would it be surprising that many of these, if not most, are all the same people? Would that be surprising? Arkansas has been a flashpoint in the dispute. About 900,000 acres of crops were reported damaged, more than in any other state. Oh, I tell you what now, Bill, he has something to do with that. I bet he got money. I bet he's got some money in that deal. What do you think,
Probably.
Yeah, probably.
Probably.
Yeah, about 300 farmers, crop scientists, and other attendees gathered in Little Rock for a hearing on their proposed stiffer dicamba controls, which Monsanto and some farmers are fighting. Now, why would a farmer fight that? Well, once you're a penny in, you might as well be a pound in, right? So once you're tied up with that for your own for your own income, once you've gotten tangled up with it, it's hard to pull yourself out. I have a friend who did successfully do so, but it's very rare for somebody to be able to survive long enough to extract themselves from that trap. The proposed restrictions are subject to the approval of a committee of state legislators, of course. And imagine who pays for their campaign. Now, who do you think would donate money to a state legislator to run for office or maintain that office? And what do you think is likely to happen if some of that money got pulled away because you didn't vote the way you were expected to? See how this game is so neatly wrapped up and played? It's interesting, isn't it? Farmers in 25 states have claimed damage to the fields due to the dicamba. And there's a map in this article that shows you, and it's pretty much squarely in the, pretty much in the central United States, somewhat biased toward the east, Tennessee being the easternmost. And just to emphasize here a little bit, farmers in 25 states submitted more than 2,700 claims to state agricultural agencies that neighbors' dicamba spraying shriveled 3.6 million acres of soybeans, just soybeans alone. Of course, Monsanto stands to make some $350 million a year in dicamba and related seed sales. And when we say Monsanto, we say Monsanto's investors. Okay. So this is one of the major things that goes on right in your own neighborhood that you might be able to have an effect on. And it certainly has an effect on you. So we didn't even get into what can happen to you if you're sitting there breathing this stuff, except for the fact that, this previous article, the pesticide, that causes skin rash. Oh. And we all know glyphosate. Well, what about glyphosate? Article in controversial truth.com poses the question, is glyphosate a herbicide or is it genocide? And that's from the 10th of this month. One of the more bizarre actions in terms of the health and safety of EU citizens, hello JJ, is the saga of Monsanto and its toxic herbicide or weed killer Roundup. So here's glyphosate back in the picture, the most widely used weed killer on the planet. On October 25th, 2017, the European Union Commission again announced that it lacked the necessary member state votes to approve a 10-year license extension for the weed killer glyphosate. Well, hooray, hooray. So the EU says, well, we just don't have the votes to let you keep on using it. But they'll try again. Behind the seeming routine announcement is one of the hottest battles over food and human health in the world. And it's nothing like that's been seen since the 1972 American decision to ban spraying of DDT. This time the stakes go far beyond the ban on glyphosate, though. It affects the future of human fertility or lack of it. Did you hear that, GGsBoo?
Mm-hmm.
Now, on that note, something else that recently came out was the discovery from a 1970 writing by somebody who was a health czar for one of our administrations, he wrote about the fact that stevia, 1970 this was written about, the stevia was a natural means to reduce the ability to have children for fertility. The stevia was practiced in certain South American cultures. That's where it grows naturally. It was used forever as a contraceptive means because it reduced your fertility level. So what has happened over the last years? We've heard about aspartame and the bad things about sugar, and don't get me wrong. I mean, genetically modified sugar beets is where most of our sugar comes from. But you get steered, and now stevia, yay, use stevia. Well, it turns out that it could very well be a way to control your fertility. I'm shaking my head saying, ooh, they got us again, didn't they? See, this evil genius is just amazing. I'm telling you, they got this stuff down. In June 2016, the EU Commission made a rotten compromise to allow an 18-month extension of the use in the EU of glyphosate-based weed killers, during which time more scientific studies would supposedly clarify whether glyphosate was a carcinogen. It was the same member states that deadlocked over whether to grant the toxic glyphosate, the main ingredient in Monsanto Roundup, a license renewal, as we saw this October, and so forth and so on. And the beat goes on. GGsBoo, what you got?
Well, you were talking about aspartame. There was a lady back up toward home who was hooked on diet drinks, and all of a sudden she got very ill, couldn't walk, got to where she couldn't dress herself. They diagnosed her with MS, and by the time she couldn't dress herself and she couldn't get her own stuff to eat, they began just to give her water to drink and food that they had cooked. She became increasingly better, and it was aspartame that did it, and it's a miracle that she was able to turn her health around. Yep. So aspartame not only stops, causes infertility, it stops everything.
Well, yeah, and the replacement, the touted replacement to that, the stevia, is what was recently exposed. Not recently, actually, it was written about in 1970 as being a potential way to control fertility and of course the birth rate. And if you really look at the statistics. And the Census Bureau, actually, it's all there for you to see. You can see the declining birth rate. And you can see the population declines. And see, you don't hear about that. I think that's one of those targets that we're flying over that no one wants to talk about. So let's have more noise. Let's have more blockbusters. Let's have more exclusive. Let's have more... Let's have more fascists. Let's have more Nazis. Let's have more liberals, conservatives, and blah, blah, blah. Let's have Uranium One and all that, which is a whole nother story that I encourage you to look into, but it's a little bit off topic tonight. But look into that. There's a vast repository of history surrounding the antics in our uranium world, in the United States at any rate. And you'll see how much fun that gets to be. But, talking about dicamba again, Southeast Missourian newspaper talks about the fact that southern Illinois farmers' grapevines were destroyed by dicamba. 4 years of work were lost. It takes about 4 years to bring Chardonnay grapes to first harvest. After planting, the vine sprouts take the first growing season to stretch up the trellis about 5 or 6 feet off the ground. The second season, growers train the vines and then sculpt them so they'll have a maximum yield. So when the vines try to form grapes in the third year, the growers typically pair them, because it's better the vines spend the season fortifying their roots than bringing fruit that isn't quite up to par. And the fourth season is a final payoff. So it takes 4 years, okay, of investment, time, effort to grow these grapes. This July, it took only 4 days for the Thurston Chardonnay vines to wither, along with a portion of his soybean crop. He spent the 4 months since navigating fallout from a now common farming trouble, accidental exposure to dicamba herbicide. And the story goes on and on. And see, this is just, I think, the tip of the iceberg. These are the stories you're hearing about. What about the stories you aren't hearing about?
That's what I was going to say.
Go ahead. I mean, you're talking about probably a huge number of them. What do you think about that, GGsBoo?
There's a lot of them.
Yeah. 'Tis a lot of them. Yeah, we got about 7 minutes here, and we've only gotten halfway through all these things that suggest, more than suggest to me, that there's something rotten in Denmark. Something is afoot and has been afoot, and we're being very skillfully distracted away from it all through using a bunch of ways. We can see how smart these people are. I mean, don't get me wrong. These creatures at the very tippy top of things are extremely smart. And if, as Hal points out in his show, they know us better than we know ourselves. And they know how to play us. They know how to divide us up and, slice and dice and vegetize, an old Ron Popeil ad. The Vegematic. Maybe we ought to come up with a new phrase, GGsBoo. I'm not sure what we call it, but we'll have to think about that one. But we just get tangled all up, and nobody wants to hear this, do they, GGsBoo?
Mm-mm.
No one wants to hear this. That the people are so well under control. They have their little smartphones, and they have their little TVs, and the Internet of Things, and which is part of the storyboard that we won't get to. How all these things are just, it's just brilliantly, it's elegant. It's an elegant design. If you want to take people down in total, this is an elegant design, and the only effect that we can have is right where we live. And then that's going to be a war. That's going to be a battle. Because if you think you're going to march around and hold signs and yell in megaphones and scream and holler and make a difference, you're doing exactly what they want you to do. Because if you go too far, they got one of those corporate prisons that they can put you in where they will continue to make money off of you. And if you're working for a corporation, you think you have a retirement coming. Well, you're probably going to die young, so they'll save money on that too. And that's not even talking about the money that you paid into your entire life or into the Social Security thing. And a lot of people think that's an entitlement. It really isn't. It's a payback of monies invested, forcibly invested. But nonetheless, it is a payback. But if you don't live very long and don't collect those, well, guess what? They don't have to pay that back either. Can you not see the bigger picture here? I really, really encourage anyone who's listening, has a question, do your research. Try to expand your vision strategically and see the big picture, because it's right there. It's right there for you to see. And I think the fact that it's becoming more obvious to more people is why the noise levels are being increased, to try to pull you away from that. And we're not even talking about net neutrality yet. That's a whole nother issue that needs to be looked at. What else you got, GGsBoo?
That's it for me.
Well, we still got a couple minutes. So let's jump over here. Let me click down here, so I don't want to get off onto another theme. Here's in the good news category. Now remember, we talked about Johnstown, Pennsylvania a couple weeks ago having voted to take fluoride out of their water supply. That was huge. That's 46,000 or so people saw the light, and they tried to disguise it as a financial benefit. Of course, you don't hear anybody complaining about spending the money to put fluoride in your water, but they tried to say, well, it's a good thing. We won't have to spend the money to put fluoride in the water. Talk about adopting a positive spin on a big loss. But anyway, in Johnstown, they took the fluoride out, but in Buda, Texas, they have also axed the plans that had, they tried to slip it in. They tried to reintroduce fluoride to the city water in Buda, and one of my Facebook friends was involved in this, actually. And of course, it got taken out, and then they tried to slip it back in, and the people got together locally in Buda, Texas, and demanded that it be put to a public referendum, the question of whether or not to refluoridate the city water supply. So they, in fact, did have the referendum, and 67% of voters chose to vote against it. All right, so this, another win, a small one, but in the win category nonetheless. So people should take some encouragement from the fact that you can make a difference, but that difference is going to be made locally. And you're going to have to fight them tooth and nail, just like these folks in Buda had to. They had to demand that it be placed on a referendum. And it goes on to talk, this article goes on to talk about how all this came about. And, of course, they try to give it a little balance by stating that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says fluoride reduces tooth decay in children and adults by 25%. Well, what they don't tell you is that it is a toxic waste. And you can look that up for yourself. All right, that's in the good news category, GGsBoo. And it's 8 o'clock. We made it. What do you think?
We did it, didn't we?
Yeah, we made it. Fluoridate. Fluoridate. Yeah, that's actually correct. Fluoridate. I say we're from the Appalachians, JJ. We talk like that. Anyway, anything you want to say before we punch out of here, GGsBoo?
Nothing but be sure to take the road less traveled. And I love you big to my heart.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us this week on the Road Less Traveled. I think we felt a little more energized, didn't we, GGsBoo? Don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thanks to all the guys in the chat room. Thanks to Grimnir for running this whole thing and taking care of all the archives. And, shout outs to the Grimnir. Shout outs to all the other show hosts. And good luck and have a great week. And we'll see you next time on the Road Less Traveled. Bye-bye.